All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, or to the right of the video if you're on a larger screen, like a computer or something like that. All right, so it looks like we got some questions in there. We will start here with Joey D. Says, good hip and shoulder turn through transition, but then hip stall. I square the club up with forearm rotation, good forward shaft lean, and I don't flip. Goes on to say, can I get better rotation with a stronger grip? No physical reason I can't rotate. I just don't. It can help, right? Because typically, if you're not rotating your body through impact, there's several factors there. A couple of them you mentioned, right? So one is an open club face, right? So if I have an open club face coming down, I'm going to stall my body so that way I can release the club to square it up. Well, you said that you have shaft lean, so that more than likely is not the problem. Because typically, if that's the problem, you're going to early release through contact, right? Another reason is because of physical limitation. If we have really stiff hips or poor joint flexibility or whatever it might be, that can definitely prevent you from getting your hips to open up as you come into contact. And you mentioned that you said there's no physical reason why you can't rotate. You just don't. So it more than likely comes down to this other factor, which is coming down steep, right? So what we have to understand is that the way that we move our hips is largely dictated by how shallow we have the club. The more shallow we have the club, the more incentive we have to rotate our body. The less shallow we have the club, the less incentive we have, right? So you may just be needing to give yourself incentive to be able to get the club or be able to get the body rotating into impact. So a stronger grip, I would say that's probably in your case. Now, it's hard to say without seeing your swing or something like that, but I would say from the information that you've given, it doesn't sound like the stronger grip is probably going to help, because that's more of a face issue, right? Which you said you have shaft lean, so I don't think that the face is an issue. You probably just need to get the club shallowing out more early in the swing, so that way you are incentivized to rotate your body. So imagine I have this club super shallow. Well, if I don't rotate my body, that club's going to work in too much from the inside. And more than likely, I'm going to chunk it, thin it, top it. If I am able to make good contact with the ball, my path is going to be too much from in to out. I'm going to hit blocks to the right. If I have the face closed enough, it may hook, and so on and so forth. Or may hit really strong draws, right? So if I have this club shallow, I need to rotate my body to neutralize that, right? So I would work on getting the club more shallow, paired with rotating, getting the body rotating more. A drill that you can do: take an alignment stick, put it through your belt loops. So I got my belt loops here. All right. And I'm going to put this where most of the stick is out the lead side of my body, the left side of my body. And then I'm going to take my swing plate here with an alignment stick on here and a pool noodle. If you want to pick up one of these swing plates, you can get them at the resources tab. It lists all the stuff that we recommend, but you can pick one of these up. But basically where I'm going to put this is I'm going to put it to where when my hips are 45 degrees open, it's going to be touching it. So I'll get my setup here, and I'm going to rotate my hips 45 degrees open, right? And that's where I want to be at impact, right? Generally. I mean, this is just a generalization, right? So I'm going to get there, and I'm going to get here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start out with some shots, right? So again, I'm going to get back in this position, make sure, okay, there's 45 degrees open with my hips, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to hit balls, right? I'm just going to start out with some shorter swings. I'm just going to bring this club right here, turn back, and I'm going to try to get my before I even come close to hitting this ball, I want to be whacking this and getting it knocked over, right? Now I just start out with some shorter swings and work up from there. and make sure that we're hitting the ball straight, right? Because if you're coming way over the top, you're going to hit everything left or slice everything, right? If you're coming down steep, right? So then I would just take that and I would just work it up to longer swings. And what you are going to need to feel is you're going to need to feel this club head really kind of dropping back behind you. A good feel to have, or what I like to have, is I like to feel like this club is perpendicular to my body, right? So if you look at my spine here, it's perpendicular to my spine. That's super shallow. I really need to rotate a ton to be able to get that club in that direction, right? So that'd be a great drill to kind of get you started. Strengthening the grip may help with that, right? It may help you to get the club a little bit more shallow, but just strengthening the grip in and of itself, that's not going to do it. It's not like you're going to strengthen your grip and then you're just going to start rotating like crazy. It's not really the way it works. You got to train the hips, and then you have to be incentivized to be able to do it. In order to be incentivized to be able to do it, you have to have the club more shallow. So you need to get that club more behind you as you're coming through. When I say behind you, right, I mean like this, behind you. This would be in front of you, right? So if I'm really rotating my hips, the club's out here, I'm going to hit really bad shots. Well, you're not going to do that for very long, right? So start out with some shorter, slower swings, and then you can build up to longer swings, pushing that hip back out of the way to get that in better position. All right. And just to go into that a little bit more, just to add a little bit more to that, do that every day. Do that every day. Start out with like half swings where you kind of like bring the club up to here and you kind of pause, have it in a nice shallow position, then turn up from there, right? And then I would start going up to the top and pausing and doing that same thing. Check it on video. Make sure that you are hitting that with the swing plate stick with the stick through your belt loops. Make sure you are hitting that well before you're coming into impact, right? And it's an exaggeration too, right? Because if you're hitting it well before impact, then at impact your hips should be more than 45 degrees open, right? So really, really exaggerated, and then try to carry those same feels to the range, right? I would just do that at home, just like hitting like a wadded up piece of paper or something like that off of a floor mat, right? That's the other thing too. We don't have to have like a whole simulator set up at home to be able to work on things. If you have space, if you have enough space to like swing a club, right? You can use an old floor mat with a wadded up piece of paper, and it works just fine to get the movement down. Then you take it to the range and you make sure that you're hitting the ball well, as you're going through it. You make adjustments from there. So that's how I would recommend working through it. I think people, I'm not saying this is you, Joey, but this is just what I've noticed from working with people. To get things like this to happen in the swing, you have to train it, right? It's not going to be like, I'm going to go to the range, I'm going to try this drill for a second, and then you're just going to start doing it forever. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. You have to train the body to be able to do it. Just like you have to train to play a musical instrument. You have to train to, drive a car, right? You just don't jump in a car and automatically you just drive really well. The first time you get in a car, right, you got to learn how to do it. You got to, same kind of thing. Walking, same kind of thing. When you're born, you just don't start walking around, right? You train it, you figure it out, right? So that's kind of the same thing here. You have to train it. All right, let's keep going here. So John B says, exactly at what point at the top of the swing do we shallow? Just before we get to the top, or at some point on the way down? Also, what do you recommend we do to shallow? Lay the club off via dropping hands, arms, or bowing the left wrist, or both? Thanks. Okay, and then he has a separate question. All right, so that's a good question because it's just not going to be the same for everybody. There are lots and lots and lots of ways to do this. All right. If you look at the PGA Tour, you're going to see lots of people doing it in very different ways. So I wish it was just clear cut and just say, yeah, you just do it at this point in the swing, and then it's just not that way. So if you look at someone like a Matt Wolff, for example, right? Matt Wolff doesn't start shallowing out the club until the downswing. Matt Wolff, he brings that club way out here. Here's the top of his swing, and then when he starts his downswing, it starts to shallow out, right? If you look at someone like a John Rahm has the club super laid off here, and he actually steepens the club a little bit as he comes down. The club actually does that a little bit, but he has it so laid off and so shallow to start with, right? He's essentially shallowing it in his backswing, and then he pulls down on it, but it's still shallow, right? So here's what I would look at to make sure that you're shallowing out the club. I would use something called the elbow plane line, or you may have heard Clay talk about it as the shallowing line or whatever, but basically it's a line that goes from the ball up through the middle of your elbow. And it is only accurate if you have the correct camera angle, right? So here's how you set up the correct camera angle. Take an alignment stick, point it at a target. All right, now I'm going to take my camera. I'm going to use a tripod because I want the camera to be still, right? And you can go on Amazon and you can get search phone tripod, and you'll find tripods with the phone mount and all that stuff, like $20. And if you already have a tripod, you can buy. I actually have one here. This is specifically for an iPad. It's a little bit bigger, but this is like $10, right? And it goes onto the tripod. It has the screw on there, and it clamps it down. So use something like that. Again, you can just find that on Amazon. All right. So I'm going to take my tripod and I'm going to line it up directly with this alignment stick on the ground, right? So as if there's a laser coming out of that tripod, it's shooting right through that alignment stick, right? Now, this is the key part. When you go to set up to the ball, you need to have your toes up there, right up close to that alignment stick. The goal is to get the camera shooting basically right down your toe line. So we don't want to be like this. If we set all that up, right, we do everything to set up, and then we set up like this, it'll be all for naught. You won't have a correct camera angle, right? So you want to make sure that you're up there within an inch or two of the stick, right? That's how you want to be. And then you want to have it at about hip level, and then you want to have it far away enough to where you and the club stay in the frame. This camera angle is actually too high, and it's too close. My foot's a little bit cut off. I go up to the top, the club gets cut off. It's too close. And I would err on the side of being too far away, if anything, right? So once we have that good camera angle, we're set up down the toe line, we're hip level, we're far away enough to where you and the club stay in the frame. I'm going to draw that line, middle of the ball, middle of the elbow. And what we want to see is we want to see that club head getting underneath that line very early and staying underneath that line pretty much all the way as it gets up to the ball, right? That's if we're doing that, then we're shallowing out the club, right? Now, if it's way underneath the line, then we're probably overdoing it. We may need to add some rotation in there, right? If we're not underneath the line, then we need to get the club shallowing out. Now, if you're above that line in the beginning and then you get under it late, you're still shallowing out the club, but you're doing it in the way that I see, single digit to middle handicappers do it, right? You're just not going to have as much control of it as you do that. With the best players in the world, pretty much every single one of them are getting it underneath that line early, very, very early. Lead arm parallel, it's just underneath that line, and it tracks just underneath it all the way down. And you can go on YouTube and look at the same thing. Make sure that you have the good camera angle that you're looking at. If you're looking at their video, you want to be able to see kind of a vertical line from their toes. If you're seeing their back toe is farther back, then you're kind of looking from the ball line, or vice versa. You might be looking from too far behind. That's why the camera angle is important with this. And I would also make sure if you're working on this yourself that you set up the camera the same way every single time, so that way you're comparing apples to apples every single time. So you're stepping it off, how far you're putting it back, and all that stuff. But that's how you tell. All right. So that we want to get that club shallowing basically as soon as possible in the downswing, and we want to keep it that way. So, John Rahm, for example, he's way underneath the line, right? And then he moves it a little bit toward the line, but he stays underneath it all the way down, right? Which is totally fine way to do it. You can lay it off and steepen it a little bit. And then as long as it's staying underneath that line and it's kicking out toward the ball, that's totally fine. That's going to work just fine. So there's lots of ways to do it. It's not just one way, unfortunately. So if you draw the elbow plane line, you're going to see how that works. Now, as far as how you shallow out the club, The best players in the world are going to shallow out the club with their upper body, and they're actually going to steepen the club with the lower body. When I look at, for example, players that tend to come down steep early and then shallow late, those are typically going to be golfers that shallow out the club with their lower body. So what that means is they start steep, and then what happens is they do this. They do the goat hump move, right? And that shallows out the club, right? I'm exaggerating, but if I start down like this and then I do that, I've shallowed out the club, but I've had to stand up out of it. And now I'm going to tend to early release and not have as good control of the club and things like that. Ideally, what we want to do is we want to flex those hips to start the downswing. That initiates the rotation of the lower body. That lower body rotation actually steepens the club, right? If I just rotate, you can see how that steepens up the club. That's going to get that club going above that line. So I've got to shallow out the club with my upper body. So it comes from several things, right? And you kind of have to find your own special recipe of these things that works the best for you. So I think a couple of them you may have already mentioned, but one of them is that bowing of the wrist, right? So if I have the club like this and I bow my lead wrist, extend my trail wrist, you can see how that shallows out the club. This is also something that squares up the face, right? Because if I bow my wrist, or it closes the face, that's going to get that club face closed, right? So that's why you see a lot of the best players doing it, because it gets that club face closed, and it also shallows out the club. Two things that we want to do in the swing to be able to come into impact and have a lot of shaffling and be able to compress the ball, right? Because if I cup my wrist, my face is open. Now I've got to do something to square it up. A lot of times that's going to lead to early release flipping the hands, right? So that bowing of the wrist. Now, I would say before all of you go out and be like, oh, I'm going to start bowing my wrist, this is a very, very, very difficult thing to do. Very difficult thing to do. I would actually learn how to shallow out the club in other ways first, unless this just comes very natural to you and you get lots of power and everything from it. That's great. But for the overwhelming majority of golfers, it just doesn't. It's a very difficult thing to do. And again, you don't even have to do it to shallow out the club. So it's not the only thing that shallows the club. There's lots of other things, right? So that's one piece. The next piece is forearm rotation. So if I hold my arms, my elbows to my side here, and I turn a doorknob to the right, as a right-handed golfer, that's going to shallow out the club, right? So forearm rotation, that feeling of turning the doorknob to the right. The next piece is going to be from my shoulder joint, right? So that's external rotation in my trail shoulder and internal rotation in my lead shoulder. You can think of this as losing arm wrestling contest with my trail shoulder and winning with my lead shoulder. You can also think of it as pointing the elbows, right? Now, when I tell people this, inevitably what they tend to do is they tend to drop the right shoulder. That's not what I'm saying. If you're dropping your right shoulder, that means that you're going into side bend. You're doing that with your spine. You're dropping your spine too early, right? So that would look like this, right? Where I drop my shoulder down. That's not what I mean by the shoulders. What I mean is, if you look at my shoulders, I want to keep my shoulder plane down, right? I want to stay in my posture. This is what I'm talking about. So if you look at, I'm getting my elbows to point out, but I'm not doing it by dropping my right shoulder. My shoulder is still staying high. So you want to make sure that you're not doing that by dropping your shoulder, right? The next piece is going to be from my arms lowering, right? So I like a good feel. I actually recently saw a viral video of Bryson talking about shallowing out the club, and he had something that I actually thought was a good thing to think about. A good thought would be to take your hands and take them to your pocket, right? So if I'm doing that, you can see how when I go up to the top of my swing, my lead arm is against my chest. And I'm gonna keep it against my chest, but I'm gonna pull it down my chest, right? So that's essentially what he's talking about. Is if I bring my arm down to my hands down to my pocket here, my lead arm's going down my chest, right? That's going to help you to get that club kind of running down that underneath that elbow plane line. You know, a lot of people, when I see they'll be up here, they leave the arms up and then they rotate, right? Those arms got to come down. We got to bring those arms down to be able to shallow out the club. And then later in the swing, we'll go into right side bend. We gradually go into that right side bend as we go into contact. We don't want to go into it right away because that's that dropping of the shoulder, right? I don't want to do this right away. that gradually happens. Now you can see I'm in that right side bend as I come into contact here. So those are the things that shallow out the club with the upper body. The lower body, pushing the hips forward or bumping the hips toward the target, that'll drop that right shoulder. Those are things that shallow out the club, but those are the things that, you know, that shallow out the club, but we don't necessarily want to do to shallow out the club. Now, granted, I'd much rather have somebody shallow out the club that way than not at all. But if we're working on shallow out the club the correct way, we want to do it with the upper body. So you can think, if I max out all those things, I bow my wrist, I get the shoulder, I do all these things. Well, look, I mean, I can't rotate enough for the amount of shallowness this club head has, right? So I have to tone down some of those things. So you have to find your recipe that does it for you, right? Now, the good part is you don't have to think about all those things, right? The only reason I went through it is because you asked, right? When I'm working with a student, I'm not telling them to do that. Like, I'm not telling them to go through all these things, right? It's just not necessary. Put something down to force that club to work from the inside, and then just hit the ball without hitting that and see what you do to shallow out the club. See what you do naturally, right? Now, if what you do naturally is to do this, then focus on pushing those hips back and missing it and see what you do naturally, right? You can put something behind you, right, to push back into as you start the downswing to make sure you're pushing back into it. So like a chair, right? So I can set up here. I can have my obstacle. So when I say put something in the way, you know, in the 20-minute shallowing fix, Clay uses an impact bag. You don't have to have an impact bag. This is just a box, an empty box. I would just use something that's not going to damage your club, right? So now I've got this here. I've got this this chair here. And now what I want to do is I want to miss that box. I want to push my hips back in the chair, and I need to come in and hit that ball without hitting that box, right? So that's forcing me to shallow out the club with different things, right? So then you can look at your swing on video and make sure, like, okay, am I, dropping my right shoulder or something like that, right? Then you may need to feel like, okay, I want to feel like I'm coming over the top of my shoulders and I'm shallowing out the club with my arms, whether it be rotating my forearms or from my shoulder joint or from my wrists. You know, any of those things can do it. You just have to find your recipe that you can put together that works the best for you. All right, so just work on getting that club underneath the elbow plane line. That's the cool thing. It's one of the coolest things about golf is there's lots of ways to do it, right? If you look at the PGA Tour, not everyone has the same looking swing. That's kind of what top speed golf is all about, right? It's about all the things that are the most important in the golf swing. That's what we want to focus on. If you look at all the professional golfers, right? They're all doing the top speed golf system, but they all have very different looking golf swings, right? Or some of them will have like crazy different swings. Now, obviously, there's swings that look very similar, right? So like Tiger and Adam Scott have very similar looking swings, right? They have differences, right? But they had very similar looking swings at points in their career, right? There's definitely golfers with very similar looking swings, but you know, some of them are just night and day different. But they're all doing the top speed golf system. They're all shallowing out the club in their own way. So you just have to kind of find your own way. It's not as cookie cutter as you might think it is. All right, so goes on to say here that we need to shift our weight to the left early in the backswing. We also hear that we need to bend at the waist hips as we start the swing from the top. Are these two ways to describe the same action, or are they two separate moves? They're two separate moves, right? Because I can have my body upright like this and shift my weight, right? That doesn't, and also I can flex my hips in the start of the downswing and stay on my back foot, right? So they are different moves. They're not the same thing, right? So yeah, if you're struggling with the pressure shifts, really what we want to feel like is that we move to our right to start the backswing. And then as we get into the backswing, we want to start moving to the left. So here, as far as the most pressure being on your trail foot, that's going to happen about right here. And then from here to the top, that pressure is going to start moving to your lead side. Now, I think this is where a lot of people get off track with this. All your pressure is not on your lead side to start the downswing, right? You're going to be about 50-50 and you're moving toward the target. Your momentum's moving that way. It's going to increase as you start the downswing. So at address, you might be 50-50. I shift to my right. It's increasing. At this point in the swing, I might be about 75-80% of my trail side. And then I'm going to continue to the top. As I get up to the top, I'm going to be about 50-50. As I continue to the downswing, I'm going to continue to increase the pressure in my lead foot as I come into impact, right? So that's really what's happening there. And then a good way you can work on that is the step drill to get the pressure shifts right. So with the step drill, you start with your feet together. You throw the club back. As you throw the club back, you're going to step forward, right? So before I throw the club back, I want to apply pressure on my trail foot. That's what gets things started. A good way to think about it as well is to imagine this club weighs 100 pounds, right? If I were to move this club, this is a heavy golf club, right? If I were to move that, if I want to move it that way with any kind of control or force, right? It's not just going to be like that, right? I'm going to shift into my trail side and I'm going to push away from that. So that way my body can kind of swing that club back. And then I just want to do the same thing in the downswing, right? So I'm going to shift into my trail side. I'm going to swing this club back. As I swing it back, I'm going to step forward. So that way I can have pressure in my lead foot to start the downswing. Now I'm going to push and I'm going to be able to fling that club through, right? So we want to get that same feeling of that step drill in a normal practice swing. Get that in a normal practice swing. And then you do that same thing when you add the golf ball. Think about it this way. If you've ever watched like little kids swing clubs, like 4, 5-year-olds swing clubs, you never really ever see them sequence terribly, right? You never see any of them all arms and flipping, right? All of them are really rotating and getting shaft lean at contact. They're all doing that. And that is because this club weighs like 100 pounds to them, right? So they have to kind of move their body properly in order to move this. Now, us as full-grown adults, right? These clubs are light, so we can swing them fast. So sometimes we lose the sense of the weight of the club, and we just kind of, for lack of a better term, we kind of manhandle it, right? And that's not the proper sequencing that's going to allow you to be able to control this the best. We want to have our body that kind of dictate that. So I want to shift with my body, throw it that way, shift with my body, throw it that way. You almost want to feel like you're a catapult. Your body is a catapult for your arms and the club to swing, right? That's what we want. That's what we want to feel like. Clay talks about this in the top speed lag section. If you go to the progression, level 1, the progression drill, he talks about the speed trail, right? So I'm shifting my feet and I'm creating the speed trail, right? That's what we want to create in the swing, is we want to create a speed trail. The way that we create that speed trail is shifting to our right to throw the club. We shift to our left to throw the club, right? Lefties would be the opposite. So that's what we want to feel as we're doing it. And then as far as the hip flexing move, that's how we initiate the rotation of the downswing. The way I see most recreational golfers initiating the downswing is they like to move their hips forward, right? So they go up to the top, then they start the downswing, they do this move, right? And a lot of times that's a mechanism to shallow out the club, or it just feels the most powerful. There's lots of reasons why people do it. But the way that we want to do it is we want to flex those hips to start the downswing. That's what's going to initiate that rotation, and then we want to extend through impact. Most people need to feel like they're keeping those hips flexed for a long time. And then the reality is more likely going to be that they're extending their hips at the correct time. But, if you find that you're coming through contact and you're like this, right? Okay, then you can work on extending the hips a little bit sooner. But most of the time when I tell people, I want you to flex your hips to start the downswing and then feel like those hips are staying flexed all the way through, most of the time people make a better motion when they do that, right? It's the fault, feel, real approach. The fault is extending the hips forward too early, right? The feel is, flexing those hips to start the downswing and then feeling like they're staying flexed all the way through. And hopefully the reality is I'm flexing those hips to start the downswing and I'm extending them through, right? So those are two separate things that you're talking about, though. All right. Lots of questions in here today. Good to see. All right. So Mark T says on short pitches of about 15 yards, I have a tendency to miss hit with the ball immediately going 10 to 20 degrees to the right. I've been working through the TSG video series on pitching, but have not been able to correct this issue that occasionally occurs. Can you recommend some things for me to try? Yeah, it sounds like you're just shanking it, to use the bad word there. Sounds like you're just shanking it. So what you can do is you can use some foot powder spray it on the club face, see really what's going on there. But sounds like you're shanking it. If you're shanking it, then what I'd recommend doing is first and foremost, I'd just be trying to hit the ball off the toe. Change your intention to hitting the ball off the toe. Because right now you're trying to hit the ball in the middle of the face and you're sounds like you're shanking it. So if you change your intention to hitting it off the toe, that will more than likely move those strikes more in the center of the face and get the ball going more solidly and in the direction that you want. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be to make sure that you're giving yourself enough space in your setup, right? A lot of times when I see people with the short game, it's okay to stand close to the ball, but they just have their hands so close to them, right? If you're going to stand close to the ball, which you can do, I don't mind this because this gets the toe in the ground, makes it a little bit easier to make solid contact, but you got to give your hands space, right? So if you're going to stand close to it, you need to have your hands out away from you a little bit, almost like a putting stroke, right? You can't stand close to it like this and have your hands like that, right? So you want to make sure that you're giving yourself some space. I like about a fist's width of space between your hands and your body. So that kind of be the first thing. And the second thing would be, even in chipping, people really extend, right? A lot of times when I see people chip and they struggle with the shanks, they're doing this number, right? So what you need to do is you need to keep those hips back, push those hips back away from the ball. Try to feel like your hips are always moving away from the ball. So in my backswing, I'm going to feel like this is exaggeration, but again, it's the fault, feel, real approach. The fault might be that you're kind of doing this, right? And if you move your hips closer to the ball, that hosel is going to move closer to the ball, and you're going to get those shots that go off the hosel and go to the right. So what I would feel like is in the backswing that my hips move away, and then the downswing, my hips move away, right? And I'm more on my heels as I'm coming through. That's a feel, right? Hopefully the reality is that you're more balanced, right? So if you tend to overdo that and you start hitting the ball off the toe, just tone it down and get it more in the center of the face. But those would be the things I'd be looking at if you're shanking those chip shots. All right, so Bruce K says, I struggle maintaining posture through contact, resulting in thin hits or smooth something. So yeah, we actually just launched a new course on staying in your posture. I don't know if you checked it out, Bruce, but I'll go check it out. If you click the instruction tab and then you click the top or the 20-minute posture fix, right? So now we have 3 20-minute courses. We have the 20-minute distance fix, we have the shallowing fix, and then we have the 20-minute posture fix now. So yeah, that's what I'd recommend you go check it out, because Clay kind of covers the main things that happen there. So like the first thing is just not being used to being that close to the ball, right? So the first drill, he has you choke up on the club way down here. So you're choking all the way down. Your lead hand's going to be where your first couple fingers here are on the metal. Your trail hand's going to be entirely on the metal, right? I'm using a wedge. So I'm just getting used to being this close to the ground when I'm hitting the ball, right? And then he works through the other things I talked about a little bit earlier. A lot of times people come up out of their posture. There's 2 main reasons. Actually, I would say there's actually 3 main reasons. The first reason is just physical limitations, right? I don't know what you do for a living, Bruce, but if you have a desk job and you're sitting at a desk all the time, those hip flexors get really tight. It's very difficult to move. The hips are going to get stiff. It's very difficult to not want to extend the hips through contact. You're going to tend to want to do that because that's just what your body, it's like the path of least resistance, right? That's the path that your body wants to follow. So yeah, working through that, getting closer to the ball, that can really help. But again, you can only do what you're physically capable of doing. And you might find that you just have a physical incapability. But in the 20-minute posture fix, Clay talks about that, right? And there's actually a test that he does in there to help you to figure out whether you can do it or not, right? The next piece is the club face being open, right? So if I'm coming down and my club face is open, I have to find a way to square that up, because if I were to really stay in my posture and rotate through impact, well, that face is just going to stay open. You're going to hit everything way to the right, right? So if you think about it this way, if I have this club set up, it's straight up and down and it's square, I push my hands forward, that face is going to be wide open, right? If I push my hands back, the face closes, right? So if you're coming down, this face is open, well, you got to find a way to square it up. And the way that you square it up is by releasing it, right? And if I release it, I have to stand up, because if I'm here and I release it, I'm going to throw that club into the ground. So I have to stand up to make room for the club, right? So it could be that the face is open, and then, which again, Clay covers in the 20-minute posture fix. And then the next piece is coming down steep, right? So if I'm coming down steep like this, and I talked about this a little bit earlier when I was talking about shallowing out the club. If I'm coming down steep like this, one way that I can shallow out the club, and one way that I see a lot of golfers shallow out the club, is the hips go that way. If my hips go that way, then my upper body is going to go that way, and look what happens to the club. Now that club shallows out. So now I can hit functional shots, but I've had to come up out of my posture to do it. Now, don't get me wrong. I would much rather have the golfer that comes out of their posture and shallows out the club than the golfer that starts down steep, stays in their posture, and continues down steep, because that golfer is going to hit really bad golf shots. So this is another thing that Clay covers. He wants you to come here and get this butt into the club pointing right at the target. If that butt into the club at this club parallel position is pointing right at the target, well, look, my club is shallow. I'm making sure that it's working from the inside, right? So Clay covers that in the 20-minute posture fix. If you want to go check that out, if you're struggling with staying in your posture, that's what I would go check out and work through. So again, to get to that, click the instruction tab at the top, then click the 20-minute posture fix from there. All right, so Mark S says, what spine angle should you maintain when hitting a greenside bunker shot versus a fairway bunker shot? It's really not going to be much different. You're going to be angled away for both. You might stay, you might not get as much angled away as you're coming into contact. You may stay, because in a fairway bunker, you're wanting to release that club to get to throw it underneath the ball, right? The release is different, right? The fairway bunker, where we're hitting or not the fairway bunker, the greenside bunker, where we are hitting we're hitting a bunker blast kind of shot where we're opening up the face. That is the only place where it's really okay to really early release it a lot, right? So we want to be coming in and kind of early releasing that. So when I early release it, it's okay for my spine angle to be closer to vertical. And then for a normal fairway bunker shot, it's just going to be just like a normal swing. There isn't really anything much different that you would do in a fairway bunker shot versus a shot from the fairway. It's just a higher degree of difficulty shot, because there's much more of a premium on making ball first contact, right? Because in sand, there's two things working against you. So one, sand is generally a less stable surface, right? So, when you're hitting a sand shot, you really need to make sure that you're swinging within yourself, right? So if you're someone whose feet are moving around everywhere and things like that, and you're swinging out of your shoes, right? Well, you gotta kind of tone that down a little bit out of the fairway bunker, because it's going to be very, very difficult to control things if you're slipping around. On normal ground, you can get away with that, right? Because you can really use friction with the ground, but sand is less stable, so you're not going to get that friction. You can be moving around too much, right? So you want to swing within yourself, and then there's a much higher premium on making ball first contact, because, again, have a fairway bunker, you have to realize part of that ball is actually underneath the ground. If it's sitting in the sand, the very bottom part of that ball, a little bit of it's going to be underneath the sand. So it's going to be really hard to make ball first contact and not hit it thin. A lot of times these fairway bunker shots, you're going to hit a little thin, right? Whereas when you're hitting out of the fairway, the grass is actually kind of holding that ball up above the ground a little bit. So you have a little bit of space underneath the ball, right? That gives you a little bit of margin for error. You can actually hit a little bit behind the ball and still hit a pretty good shot. You do that in a fairway bunker, not happening, right? You hit a little bit behind the ball, the club's going to dig into the sand, and then you can't really get a good. That offers resistance to the ball, and you're just not going to be able to get a good contact on it. So there's just a higher premium. So what I would say, a fairway bunker, I know we're going to get into them sometimes, but you just have to try to avoid those as much as you possibly can, because besides like penalty strokes where you're hitting it out of bounds or into the water, that's what's going to add the most to your strokes, is hitting it in fairway bunkers, right? On average, they've measured this. And if you want to learn more about that kind of stuff, this is a book called Every Shot Counts by Mark Brody. He's the guy that came up with the statistics like strokes gained and things like that. Better statistics and analytics for golf to help us understand what makes, what differentiates players, right? And they found through data, shot tracer data and stuff like that, besides penalty strokes, OB, water, and things like that, fairway bunkers add more strokes to your score in the end. So you really want to try to avoid those, even if you have to set it 30 yards back. Being 30 yards farther away isn't as bad as being 30 yards closer in a fairway bunker, right? So I would try to avoid those as much as you can, because it's just a higher degree of difficulty kind of shot. So yeah, that's why I would say, if you're hitting out of a fairway bunker, I would try to swing within yourself as much. You might want to take a little extra club, put the ball, maybe one ball back in your stance compared to what you normally do, and that may help you to increase your odds of making ball first contact. But those are the adjustments that I would make. All right, let's keep going. So Bruce K says, Q, I struggle with both thin shots that go weakly to the right and smothered hits that go to the left. What is the... All right. Your instruction has helped a lot. Often I feel I'm too upright at address. How can I find the best forward? Okay, so lots of different things going on here. So, yeah, so if you struggle with thin shots, that has a lot to do with the staying in your posture thing. If I stand up out of my posture, I'm going to release the club early. I'm going to tend to struggle with thin shots. So I would just make sure that your ball position, I play your ball position middle of the stance for shots off the ground. I'd really make sure that you're getting your weight shifted to your lead side, because that's going to help you to get the low point of your swing, which is the bottom of your swing arc, right? The club comes down in an arc, right? I want the bottom of that arc to be in front of my ball, right? So if I early release, that's going to tend to move the low point back. So that puts a much higher premium on one, having a good ball position. I find that a lot of people move that ball position really far forward, especially with the longer clubs like fairway woods and things like that. You can move it a little bit forward, but I find that people are playing fairway woods like up here, right? You're going to hit a lot of smothered, chunk shots from that position, no matter what club you're hitting. If you're hitting it off the ground, for hitting a shot off the ground, I have to have a downward angle attack on the ball, right? So if you're standing up out of your posture and releasing the club early, you're going to have a harder time hitting down on the ball. So that's why we need to make sure that our ball position is in a place where we can more easily maneuver that. I like to see it middle to maybe one ball middle of the stance. And then we have to make sure that we're getting our weight forward, right? So that way we have that feeling that we're hitting down and through the ball, right? If I'm coming up out of my posture, but I'm getting my body forward, right? And I'm got my ball position there, I can still, take a divot and hit down on it. I find that a lot of people who come up out of their posture, they have the ball position too far forward. They're kind of hanging back, and then they'll hit a lot. If they're coming in like this at contact, you're going to hit a lot of thin shots and chunk shots like what you're talking about. So get that ball position more in the middle. Make sure you shift that weight. I would try to feel like 100% of your weight is on your lead side. I try to feel like that lead shoulder is on top of your lead ankle, right? And that will help you to hit much more solid shots and be able to help you hit down and through the ball. And goes on to say, how can I find the best forward spine tilt at address for me? Yeah, so here's a way you can kind of go through it. And this is just a generalization. There are golfers that that are more bent over and less bent over. And also, you're going to be, bent over different amounts based on the club as well. For a wedge, you're going to be more bent over. For a driver, you're going to be more upright. Right. So here's a good way to kind of find that position. So what I want you to do is I just want you to get in your width of stance that you normally be in, right? And I really want you to relax your shoulders. Really, really relax your body, right? Really relax the spine. I find that a lot of people, they'll stick their butt out and they'll have what's called S spine, where the spine kind of makes an S shape, from this angle. We want to have our spine and our back pretty flat, right? And I find that a lot of people, in trying to get their spine flat, they'll stick their butt out. That actually doesn't make your spine flat. It makes it curved, right? So if anything, you want to feel like your hips are very level here, and you're just kind of standing here, okay? Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to really relax our arms. We're going to push our hips back and our chest forward, and at the same time, and I want you to feel like the balance in your feet is equal, right? So I don't want to be pushing my hips back and my chest forward and I'm weighing my heels. I don't want to be pushing my hips back and my chest forward and weighing my toes. I want it to be equally the same pressure from heel to toe, right? So again, I'm really relaxed. My arms are wet noodles here. My shoulders are really relaxed. I'm going to push my hips back and my chest forward. And once I get to where my hands are basically hanging over my toes, I'm going to stop, right? And now I'm going to put a little bit of flex in my knees, right? To where the flex in my knees is basically even with the balls of my feet. Now from here, I'm going to grab my club, and then I can just make an adjustment based on the length of the club. So this is like a 50-degree wedge. Here this would be a good kind of setup here for a driver, right? So this is a much longer club. Driver here is going to be almost a grip length longer. Here I'll do the same thing, right? So again, I'm going to be really relaxed. Let my arms. I'm going to push my hips back, my chest forward. I'm going to be very equal in my feet. I'm going to let my hands hang down straight over my toes there. A little bit of flex in my knees, right? I don't want to be like this over my toes. I don't want to be straight-legged, right? A little bit of flex in my knees. Now I'm going to grab my driver, and I'm actually going to stand a little bit more upright here and reach just a little bit with my driver because it's so much longer, right? So that's a good place to find. But again, this is just a general medium of where you can be. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful with your hands in your lap like this. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful with your hands way out farther away from you and standing taller. Bryson sets up like this. Jim Furyk sets up like this. Both are world-class golfers. Both have shot a 58 in pro tournaments, right? So I think it was just recently that Bryson shot 58, right? And Jim Furyk has shot 58 as well. So you can play really good golf. You have to find what works best for you. But what I went over, that's a good generalization to find a good spot. All right. So Jim M says, lately I'm pulling my irons. I started opening the face a bit more and opening my stance in case I'm just turning through the shot too soon. Mixed results, ideas. So let's talk about what causes a pull, right? I'm going to put an alignment stick down. This alignment stick represents the target line, right? So if I put my ball on that, that's going to be going through the target. If you're hitting a pull, this is what's happening. Your club is coming down outside that target line, hitting the ball, then working inside the target line, right? And then your club face is in the same direction as the club is moving. So if you want to put numbers on it, you could say I'm swinging 5 degrees to the left, right? And then my club face is also pointing 5 degrees to the left. That's going to produce a ball flight that's going to start left and just go straight left, right? So what you need to do is you need to start getting this club to work from the inside. And the way that you do that is by shallowing out the club. So if you're pulling your irons, you're pulling anything, you're just kind of coming a little bit over the top. And what you need to do is work through our 20-minute shallowing fix, right? Work through Clay's 20-minute shallowing fix course. That's going to get you to shallow out the club. So step one, we have to be incentivized to shallow out the club. So the way that we typically do that is we get the face more closed by strengthening the grip. That's drill one. We're going to hit hooks in drill one. Doesn't matter where it starts. It only matters that it hooks, right? These aren't going to be beautiful golf shots. These are going to be ugly golf shots. That's okay. We're going to tone it down later. But this, we need to kind of go exaggerated to be able to get to where we want to go faster, right? So you're going to hit 10 hooks in a row. The reason why you got to get 10 hooks in a row is because you got to be good at it, right? If you can get 10 in a row, then you're good at it. If you can only get 3 in a row, you're not good enough at it yet to move on to the next step, right? So drill number 1, Clay walks you through how to find a naturally stronger grip to get that club face more closed. We're going to hit 10 hooks in a row. Doesn't matter where they start. They can start left and hook. That's fine. But we just got to get the ball to hook. Drill number 2, the outcome that we're looking for is we want to get the ball to start to the right in hook, right? So in order to make that happen, we need to shallow out the club. We need to swing from the inside, right? So Clay goes over how we're going to do that. I went over it a little bit earlier, but basically one thing that you can do is you can put a barrier in your way. Now look, if I swing outside that target line, I'm going to hit the box, right? So I need to miss that box, hit the ball. If I have the face closed enough still, ball will start to the right and curve to the left, right? I got to get 10 in a row. Again, I got to get 10 in a row because I got to be good at it in order to move on to the next step. If you only get 3 in a row, you got to keep working at it until you get good enough at it. Drill number 3, that's when we dial everything in. We've overdone everything. Now we're going to tone everything down to get the ball flight that you're looking for, right? So work through that 20-minute shallowing fix and you'll get rid of those pulls, right? So to get to the 20-minute shallowing fix, click the instruction tab and then click the 20-minute shallowing fix from there. So Tom M says, I understand how to do the squat move, but from physics standpoint, why does this work to add distance? So there's several things going on there. So one, if I'm flexing my hips to start the downswing, right, I'm going to be putting more ground force, right? If I'm moving my body up, I'm not putting as much force into the ground. If I'm pushing my body down, putting more force in the ground, that vertical force, that can help me to create more speed and be able to help me to get the club to accelerate more through contact. The next thing is if I'm initiating the rotation of my body with flexing the hips, and then I'm coming in and I'm able to extend my hips through contact to get my hips opening up, I'm going to be more likely to be able to get shaft lean, and that shaft lean is going to de-loft the face. If I'm de-lofting the face, I'm transferring more energy to the ball. The ball is going to go farther. Right, so those are really the 2 main things that are going to help you to create more distance. One, you're going to be able to get more speed from putting more force into the ground. And 2, you're going to be able to get more distance from having more shaft lean, transfer more energy to the ball. All righty. Got a few minutes left here if we got any more questions. Tom M says, thanks, Q, but this seems to be correct for irons, but what about driver? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You know, people who early release their driver, you know, they tend to come in like this, right? If you're going to tend to have a little bit of shaft lean with the driver. Not a lot. There's some players that have a lot, like John Rahm, Dustin Johnson, they have a lot. They play high lofted drivers, though, like 11, 12-degree drivers because they have so much shaft lean. Most tour players are going to have little to a couple degrees of shaft lean, right? If you're releasing early, you're going to tend to have backward shaft lean, right? So having the hands, you know, kind of more straight up and down is going to do that. And also, same thing with the driver. You're putting more vertical force in the ground. You're going to tend to be able to create more speed if you're using it correctly. And not to mention, think about it this way. If I were to jump as high as I could, right? You know, if I'm like this, right? If I were to jump as high as I could from this position, you know, think about it this way. If I'm just extending my hips from here, that's as much as I can jump up, right? If I want to jump as high as I could from this position, I would actually go down, flex my hips, and then go up. It's the same kind of thing, right? I want to flex and then I want to push hard to be able to be able to sling that club harder, right? So it's even more so with the driver than any other club because you're trying to create more vertical force with the driver. All right, I got a few minutes left. If anybody has any last minute questions, please try to get them in as soon as you can, so I can make sure to answer them thoroughly for you. I do have to go at 4, so. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining me. Great office hours. Wish they could all be like that. Lots of questions, good questions too. So yeah, hopefully y'all more of you can make it tomorrow. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to y'all next time.